Hey all, it's KR King of D&D Homebrew, and today I'm talking about those situations that you have within the operational pillars of D&D, or exploration, combat, and role play, or social interaction, as some people want to say, in which you either make a decision, we're going to run this out operationally as the game prescribes, going along and running a combat or doing a role play, whatever, or we're going to, as some people say, hand wave it. We're going to say, oh, this is the occurrence, this is the outcome. We're just going to talk that through and very briefly and just move on to other aspects of the game. And as I say, some people call this hand waving, but it's an important distinction because sometimes there's hand waving in terms of actual game mechanics. So for instance, some people don't play encumbrance at all. Some people don't keep track of crossbow bolts or how many torches that you've burned, that kind of thing. I'm not talking about hand waving that. I'm talking about three pillars that I mentioned. You got role playing, you got combat, and you got exploration, to show how these different, sometimes you want to run this out procedurally, just like the game says, and then sometimes you want to do a little hand wave and move on. Now, the reason this came up for me was I was playing online in a Pathfinder game. And it's an adventure path, so there's a prescribed, we think, you don't know as a player what you're supposed to do, but there's a prescribed set of actions. We explored this underground complex, and there was an area that it had a huge cave in. There was things threatening these people that lived above, and had been coming out of this cave in, and we were supposed to dig through this cave in to continue their exploration, to, save them from this menace. How they were going to get out through the cave in, we weren't sure. We searched and searched, no secret doors, no entrances. This was the only way in. And what happened was, when we said, okay, well, what's it going to take to find someone to dig this out who has the know-how and we can pay them and all this stuff, it became a very difficult process of role-playing, of asking people in town and trying to get people to do things, and they're suspicious or they don't want to go there. And then how possible is this? How did we determine this? We had a dwarf in the party, but for some reason he couldn't figure out what it actually took. Was it possible to dig this out? Were we supposed to do something else? And an entire 3-hour session was spent. And then in the end, we found someone. They said, yes, we can dig this out. It will take 2 weeks. So now we're sitting there waiting for 2 weeks. And the next session, we continued to run, waiting on those 2 weeks. So we did another thing. We helped out this caravan. But as I'm playing this, I'm thinking to myself, as a GM, why are we running this? Why is it taking 3 hours to determine, one, whether we can dig this out, and two, somebody to do it? Half an hour? 15 minutes? Now, again, as an old GM, I have that thing of don't be that guy, don't be that person that every time you run in someone's game, you're sitting there thinking, well, I would do this and I would do that. But I spent 3 hours trying to find somebody to dig out this tunnel. And we started to say, why are we doing this? Let's just go somewhere else. But we're in this adventure path environment, right? It's not a sandbox campaign. We can't just say, well, the tunnel's closed up, you guys lose, we're going to go off and do something else. Or do we? We didn't get any indication from the GM. Did we have to do this? Did we not? It appears that we do. We are going to get this done. So my thing is, that is a situation in which you can hand wave that. You can say, okay, you go, you investigate, and maybe you run a little bit. Maybe you have to go into town. Who do you talk to? Well, are there miners? Is there any kind of mine around here? Is anybody that would know that? Dwarves, who might know? Okay, talk to the dwarves. What do they say? Well, we ask them this, and you give them the details, and then they say, well, this is how much it would be. We're not talking to you. We have nothing to do with it. Okay, well, is there anyone else we can ask? I don't know. Is there? That kind of thing. This is what happened constantly. It was like, okay, who else do we have to talk to, right? Just have them talk to the person, find out how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take. And then if you've got 2 weeks to wait, do you need to be there to supervise, right? Do you need to, are you there thinking that something else is going to hear you digging and going to burst through an Umber Hulk or something? Okay, well, then we'll sit there, and that will be very quick. You dig for a day, and an Umber Hulk bursts out. Now, okay, day one, what are you going to do? I mean, this is literally kind of what was happening, and I'm like frustrated as a player because I'm thinking you should hand wave that. You should say, okay, this is how long it takes. Well, how do you determine that? Because there is an element here where the activity that you're doing might in fact require some role playing. And this is the decision you want to make when you're thinking about hand waving some role play activity is, what is the request and what influence is it going to have in your world? Let's say you have a sandbox campaign. Let's just say that you have this thing with a mine shaft. When you go to ask people in town, does that mean, wait a minute, you guys are digging around in that area? Is that forbidden? Are there going to be people curious about this? Do you have to keep it on the QT? Because once people hear, hey, they cleared out everything in that dungeon, now we could go and open up the mine shaft. So that might be something where you role play. Does it take 3 hours to do that? Well, maybe if somebody in town is going to find out about this and you say, okay, you ask a couple of people, you have to wait for someone, so you're there overnight, and during the night they try to sneak into your lodgings or something or attack you, or you hear that people are asking about you, so then you're going to go role play that. Well, that's moving forward. That's another group trying to get information or trying to steal, get in there before you have that. That's active. That is something that's influencing the campaign. So that's your first rule in terms of, do I hand wave this or do we play it out, is does it make a difference in terms of the fortunes of your players and the narrative of your story? Because as far as we could tell, it wasn't making any difference. We were just asking and no one was telling us and nothing was happening, and we just went on. Hours of gameplay. And even if it does move forward, that narrative, how much time are you going to spend on it? Because you're asking this and these people find out and they come there at night, or they start talking about you. Then the players go and confront them. And what happens? Do they just say, I don't know what you're talking about? Or, yeah, and how long should that take? And should it be a frustrating experience, or should it be in the same pace that you're trying to do everything, right? You're trying to keep things moving in your world. So that's a role play situation in which you want to think about, does it move the story forward? Our first rule. The second rule is, how difficult is this? Because if you have a situation where you're going to have to talk to the king, and it's getting to talk to the king, you're just some lowly first level group, you're not going to be able to talk to the king. Or, you got to wait, you got to negotiate, you have to go to the vizier's assistant every day and ask, and then and are you going to make them role play that every single day for like 30 days? They ask the vizier, come up with a new thing. What else do you do? How else do you do that? To see the king? Or do you say, you know what? It's either impossible to talk to the king at your level, you have to do this, or you have to do a favor for someone and then they'll talk to the king. Okay, we'll do the favor. Off you go. Right? You're not just sitting there waiting to see, when am I going to be able to talk to the king, because it's really difficult. Or we're in an emergency situation, whatever, and you have one of the non-players characters go to the vizier, tell him what just happened. The vizier sends for you, and suddenly you have an audience for the king, and you're some first-level character. That's a big deal. And that's the role-playing situation. That's what's interesting. You don't just necessarily say, okay, you talk to the king, he hears you, and he says, okay, I'm giving you 1,000 gold pieces to go investigate the mine shaft. No, that's an opportunity for the players to interact with the king, with the noble court, to see what's going on, to have the vizier might be opposed to the players, or there might be prince of the king's brother, or who knows what might occur in that negotiation, in that audience with the king. So that's something and it moves the players, gain renown and gain influence in the city. I would run that, right? I wouldn't necessarily spend 3 hours running it, but I would definitely run that encounter. But getting to the king, if it's going to take a long time, either, accelerate it and say you just hang around day after day after day after day. Maybe you're doing roles. Maybe you're doing like influence roles if you're in a system like Pathfinder where they have those kind of rule systems. Maybe it's random. Maybe the players have to give a gold piece a day. I don't know what it is, but you just hand wave the role playing and get to the audience with the king, because that's what's interesting. And role playing that's just vamping, or the players, interacting with one another and being funny or whatever, that may be part of your campaign. You may have that kind of narrative style. But for me, and I think for a lot of players, we just want to get to the role playing that moves the story forward. So the next thing we get to is combat. And I think there's two elements here in terms of hand-waving combat situations. One, if the players are at a level where the creatures that they're going to encounter, they could easily dispatch. I'm not sure I want to run that, right? I'm not sure, I might hand wave it, and you can hand wave, you just beat them, or, they run away. Just because it's not that interesting, right, to run that. Now, if you say, okay, well, then I'll balance every encounter, and that way it's always a hard encounter, however you think of balanced, not necessarily deadly, well, then you got to go through that process of fighting the battle. And that may, especially at the higher levels when the players have a lot more abilities, depending on the system you're in, that's going to take a lot longer of actual game time. Because one big factor here is you've got a limited amount of real life time. So you're always asking, is the spending of those 3 hours of my real life time worth it in terms of the game, the narrative, everyone having fun, everyone moving forward? Because the thing is, especially when you get to higher levels, those battles are going to take time, right? And I'm talking real world time, an hour, 2 hours, maybe more, depending on the system you're in. And you're just having battle after battle after battle. Well, what's going on around that with the other two pillars? The exploration, the storyline, the narrative. Are the players in a hurry? Is there somewhere they want to get to? Maybe it's not a hurry in terms of a ticking clock, but they just want to move on. They're interested in something that they've discovered. They want to go over here and find it. And then they have battle after battle after battle to get there. And it clogs up your game. It clogs up the flow of the game, the real life time being spent on things. It doesn't, certainly if you have an easy battle, you don't necessarily want to run those. They're not going to get that many points. And again, real life time. Hard or deadly, sure, those can be really exciting, but you'd rather use those in a narrative form, getting to something interesting, getting to something where the players are going to learn something or solve something or continue on their mission. Okay, a big battle there that takes an entire session, but not necessarily just a battle to have a battle. And this can occur in a number of ways. So I have this dwarven city, Numer it's called. It's in the northern end of my homebrewed world, and there's this mountain hex leading from the sea. You got to go through this hex and to get to Numer. And initially, when the players would run there, they would have random monsters. Mountains have a lot of terrain. The dwarves purposely put their city up for, say, well, they want a certain kind of hills for mining, but they also wanted to be a little ways away so they could see things approaching, right? It's kind of difficult to get there. And when they go all through the mountains to go down to trade goods and everything, they have kind of a little village near the water. They bring an armed party. Because they know the mountains are nasty, right? So it protects them from outsiders, and they just are very cautious. Well, sometimes the players have to go back to Numer. They have a dwarf in their party from this city. They're doing all sorts of negotiations. Maneth, this town to the south, and the dwarves discovered something in the mountains and back and forth. And sometimes when I run them going to Numer, I hand wave the random monsters. Because we don't necessarily have time to have a 3-hour battle with something in the mountains. Because the mountains are deadly. It makes sense to run into a deadly encounter that really presses the group. But they're all 7th level now. That's going to be a long battle in a 5e system. And we're trying to get this narrative. We're going here, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to do this thing. And now we got to sit there and have this battle. The question here is, do you say to the players, all right, you guys are in a hurry. We're going along. I don't want to have this big battle. So I'm just going to hand wave this. So you're just in the city. Okay. The issue there is, so are they going to expect you to do that every time they're in a hurry? And if you decide this time I am going to have a battle, maybe it's because you're not prepared for the next thing they're going to do. So you set up a battle to kind of delay or something, or you just feel like you want to do this battle or what? Well, how come, can you just blow off the random monster? No, this time we're going to have it. So you may just say, I'm going to tell them I'm hand waving it this time, but I'm not going to do it every time. We're just going to do it this time. So be prepared. You go through this hex again, you might get a random monster. Okay. Or you can do something like when they're going through the mountains, you see something flying over here as an encounter, and it swoops around and circles, sort of like the old great white shark circling, and then it flies off. Or you see some creatures over here, you think there might be orcs or something, and they see your party, and they're scared, and they run away. Right. We're not going to have the battle. Right. Or it's something where some orcs are there and they're injured or something, and the players can maybe they just kill them. And if they do, if they decide there's orcs injured and they're asking for help or whatever, one of those interesting encounters, what do the players do? And they say, nah, we're just going to kill them. Then you're going to hand wave that battle. Maybe you have one orc run off, right? And say, oh, they killed us or whatever, just for a little intrigue. But whatever the case, you're going to hand wave. You're going to say the odds of there being some bizarre situation here where some player gets killed or there's something significant is so small, it doesn't matter. Except if you are trying to do a resource drain with an encounter, the players are going somewhere, you don't want to spend the time to do an encounter, you want to hand wave it or whatever, do you have something where it drains their resource? They would have had to fight this. this becomes a question of the orcs are going to attack. What do the players do? Do they throw some spells and whatever, and the orcs run away? And you're thinking, well, that's a little bit of a resource drain. But in a sense, you're hand-waving it because you don't want to sit there and run this dumb orc encounter, okay? So, again, I can't tell you what to do in all these situations. Sometimes I have said, okay, guys, we're in a hurry. I'm not going to have the random monsters here. Because I use random monsters. And this is the other thing. Some people never use them. They just say, oh, you're here, and then you're there, and then you're here. Okay, but I say when you go through a wilderness hex, there's a chance you run into something. So I have said, okay, we're not going to run this encounter. I'm just hand-waving it. But don't be prepared for this all the time or whatever. This is kind of unusual. But what I prefer to do is just say, oh, something flies off. If I'm rolling it, I got to say there's an encounter. And so I got to decide that. But if I'm needing to hand wave, again, because time is precious, the real life time to run your world, and having those battles endlessly, they can get in the way. And then you have exploration. Are there instances where you have an exploration of something in which you're going to just hand wave and say, okay, you guys search this thing and here's what you find. You don't go room by room, corridor by corridor, looking for secret doors, listening, maybe having wandering monsters if it's a sort of dungeon complex or cavern or anywhere, right? Out in the wilderness, some encampment, and they want to look at it. What do they find? They look in each tent of the abandoned camp. Is it important? Does this exploration move the story forward? Is there something there that's important such that it would take the procedural exploration stuff of what are you doing? What are you looking at? Do you go to the tents? Which tent first? All that kind of stuff. Or do you say you look at the camp and there's nothing of interest, right? Now, I have had situations where there are things of interest and I didn't do I hand wave the exploration because of the time factor, because of the fact that we're in the real world. Well, last time I was playing D&D with my in-person group, 3 people showed, 3 others were gone for various reasons. 2 were sick that day. Another one we knew wasn't going to be there, but the 3 that they wanted to play. So I did a one-shot. I did a thing that I had created, this cavern, this chalk cavern with these chalk monsters. It's a long story. We had this big, interesting, they had to get these different colored chalks and draw these symbols. It was ancient Stone Age magic and all this stuff. But it went right up till 10 o'clock. And they finished off the encounters of the monsters, but then they had all this other stuff, these different colored chalks and these different magic and these kind of symbols that were drawn. And I just hand waved it. I just said, okay, and you explore the thing, and here's what you find. There's some magic items, and here you go. We're done. Because I did it because we were at the end of the session. And the other 3 players were going to be back next week. They're not there. These guys are going to come back to the main area where they're staying because they just wandered off by themselves narratively in the game. Well, now I got to run that all out. Maybe they go back and they get the other players and they come back and we explore this cavern completely to find these magic items or these little chalk things. They can draw symbols and I think create, I can't remember, alarm spell and different things. The point is that that's not as interesting as the narrative storyline that they're all pursuing as a group. So I just hand waved. I just said, you explore it, here's the treasure, move on. Because there were some things, I had some ideas about traps, about riddles, about figuring out what this stuff does. The order in which you took these things and drew these things and everything was going to make a difference, but they had fought the creatures in an earlier than I had thought, perhaps. I mean, there's different ways you could go in these caverns. So by that time, it wasn't relevant to continue to do this to discover these mysteries. What you want to do with exploration is just to remember that if it's important for the storyline that they discover these things, whether it's in a certain sequence or how they discover them can make a difference, you're going to want to run that. But if, like I said, in that situation, end of the session, and you're going to move on to something in the next session, or you can see that, you're not going to stop at the midpoint here or whatever, in the middle of this action and pick it up the next week. You can decide to hand wave. You can decide that, when you go into this abandoned castle, let's say, a ruined castle, and it's got, a tower, and it's got some, bare walls, it's got maybe a dungeon, although now we're getting more complicated. But you can always hand wave and say, you look through the thing and you find nothing of interest. And be done. And not have to go through the process. If there is nothing of interest, why go through the process of, okay, what do you do? Where do you go? Is it just to keep them on their toes? Is it just like, hey, even though I know there's nothing here, I want them to know that every time you enter a ruined structure like this out in the middle of nowhere in a tower and you go in there. Something could be there. And of course, something could. But is that what you want to do with your time that you're playing? Do you want to hand wave to move on and keep your narrative going? Or do you want to establish that we have procedurals that we do in terms of exploration, in terms of running into monsters, in terms of negotiating with the NPCs and sentient creatures or whatever in your world that we're going to stick by all the time? And I say, no, I don't necessarily want to spend my precious 3 or 4 hours or 2 hours or even 8 hours, if you're running for that long, doing things that are far more, procedural and obvious and not necessarily moving the story forward. Let's compress those and let's dig in to the ones that really matter. So hopefully that's helpful to you. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe to my channel. I'm always looking for more. I'd love to hear situations, exploring battles, or role play that you have hand waved, or those that you think, nope, no matter what, we're going to run that out. That's how I do things. Of course, most importantly, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.